Hey everyone! So today I'm going to take over John Green's spot. I'm actually going to do your lecture this week because I kind of really like this topic, and so I thought I'd do it. It's going to coincide with this reading, right? You're reading this book, The Kingdom of Matthias, which is a secondary source. Even though it's written as a novel, it is written by historians, so it's historically accurate, and it's a really fun and entertaining read. But one thing I wanted to point out to you is that this prologue, which is called Two Prophets at Kirtland. It is an excellent kind of introduction to the book. It gives you a lot of good historical context, so make sure you get to that. You don't need to read the notes, but you do need to read all the way through to the epilogue, but you don't need to read notes on a source, just FYI. So, we're going to talk about the Market Revolution today and the Second Great Awakening and a little bit about how they coincide. Okay, so what is the Market Revolution? It started in the first half of the 19th century, shortly after the American Revolution. It is an economic transformation that swept across the U.S. and it actually caused a westward movement in the U.S. And really important aspect of it, it was really caused by a series of innovations in two categories: transportation and communication, right? And when we think about innovations in those categories, we think about how they can kind of make the world smaller, right? In this case, they're making the U.S. much smaller, allowing the U.S. to spread out more because there could be more transportation of goods and communication of information in a much easier way, okay? So we're going to talk about some of those different inventions that allowed that to happen, and we're also going to talk about the movement westward. So it's the first time there's significant movement across the Appalachian by Americans. Okay, so let's talk about some of those things. And I'm hoping that this PowerPoint is going to work because it's being a little testy. All right. So we have the Market Revolution, and then we're going to talk about some steamboats. Okay, so steamboats. Oh, actually, I want to say one other thing. Okay, so big ones we're going to talk about. Steamboats, which then allow canals to be built, railroads, and telegraphs, okay? And they really created a new present for America, allowing the economy to change in a significant way, okay? It linked farmers across the nation, allowed the movement of goods in a much quicker and sufficient way. Which then allowed people to move further away because we could get goods to them and we could get information to them. Okay, so let's talk about steamboats. So steamboats were the first time that we could move upstream, right? So we used to always have to move with the actual stream, the way the current was moving. We could move against the stream, which then caused the ability to actually build canals. So the Erie Canal was one of the first really important canals. It was completed in 1825 in upstate New York, and this actually allowed New York City to become the leading port in access to trade, okay? So it really caused New York to kind of boom at that point, right? And much of the book takes place in New York City, so think about urban centers and how urban centers are changing at this time because of these innovations, okay? Also, huge one, railroads. Railroads are going to be significant up to the Revolution because they're mostly built in the North, and then after up to the Civil War. I'm so sorry, Civil War, not Revolution, Civil War. And then the North really can utilize their railroads during the Civil War, and then after the Civil War, more are built in the South. Okay, so it also opens up different parts of America that we're never able to actually travel to. And lastly, because railroads began to be used more frequently, Americans needed more coal for fuel. So it then led to a greater mining industry. So it's kind of causing other industries to pop up because they need to build railroads and lines. Cool? Awesome. The telegraph. This one's really, I think, super interesting. So the telegraph allowed instantaneous communication throughout the nation, okay? The device was actually invented in the 1830s, but it was really used commercially by 1844. So it took a while to get it into use. They used Morse code, which was named after Samuel F.B. Morse, who actually invented the telegraph. And they could send messages over electric wires, okay? And within 16 years, they built 50,000 miles of telegraph wire. They strung it, right? So across these miles so that they could actually communicate in a much more quick way, right? Initially, it was really mostly used for businesses, especially newspapers, right? So newspapers could get information quickly and report it quickly. It allowed for better flow of information and brought uniformity. This is really interesting to me. Uniformity to prices, right? So they had more knowledge of what pricing was happening across the nation, right? So I think that's really, really kind of interesting. And in this common age where communication is so instantaneous and important, I think that the telegraph has such interest and importance, I think. It's personal preference. All right. So all of these inventions allowed things to be transported, information to move, and then it allowed westward movement. Okay, so this is the first time in American history where Americans were moving westward in very significant numbers. Between 1790 and 1840, some 4.5 million people crossed the Appalachian Mountains. Okay, and this is a really interesting fact. This number, this 4.5 million number, is more than the entire U.S. population at the time of Washington's first inauguration. So they're doubling the size of the nation really quickly, and then they're moving people really quickly. It's unbelievable to me. Most of these pioneers moved in groups, and they would clear land together, build barns, build farms together, so that they maintained community as they were moving. I always think of Oregon Trail when I think about this stuff. The Louisiana Purchase, which actually happened in 1803 under President Jefferson, he bought a bunch of land, approximately 827,000 square miles of land west of the Mississippi River for just $15 million. He bought it from Napoleon of France, okay? So this basically doubled the size of the U.S., the original 13 colonies, and it allowed for this huge westward movement, populations moving west at rapid numbers. Settlers actually rushed to claim land. It was cheap, so people that couldn't afford to live were moving westward and could get cheap land and then build farms, okay? And they could get goods because of all the other things that are happening. Also, slavery. Let's talk a little bit about the cotton gin. Okay, so at the time of the American Revolution, slavery looked like it could die out because cotton wasn't able, we couldn't pick it and produce it in an easy way, so it made it a really difficult crop to actually produce and make money off of because of the difficulty it takes to actually make something out of cotton at this time. And tobacco was a crop, but it wasn't needed in such huge numbers, okay? So they thought, the Founding Fathers actually thought that slavery would eventually vanish. And in many of the northern states, it actually did in the early 19th century. There was a lot of gradual emancipation, which meant that they would gradually earn their freedom, and then there would no longer slavery would exist in many of the northern states. But this was all changed by the cotton gin. So in 1793, Eli Whitney, who was a Yale graduate working in Georgia as a private tutor, invented the cotton gin. It was a fairly simple device consisting of rollers and brushes, and the gin quickly separated the side from the cotton. So they could separate these two things that would make it easier to produce, okay? This invention, the cotton gin, along with the rising demands for cotton and the opening of new lands in the West, what I just talked about, essentially revitalized American slavery, and it made it huge. It made the entire Southern industry and economy based in slavery. There's huge numbers of slaveries that end up moving westward, and then they also are essentially breeding slaves on the plantations in the deep South, and so more western states. Okay. Some facts about that. Historians have estimated that around 1 million slaves were shifted from older slave states to the deep South between 1800 and 1860. Okay. Some slaves actually were brought across with their owners, but there was a huge trading industry. Slave trade became huge at this point. That became a separate industry altogether, separate from just plantation slavery. Okay, so revitalization of slavery, which then will lead to issues and the Civil War, so we'll talk more about that later. Okay, along with this Western movement comes this concept that Americans started to believe in, and it's a concept called manifest destiny. It actually affected the way Americans thought about themselves and their nation. It enforced ideas of freedom, but also this idea that they could claim lands westward and make them better. Okay? New York journalist John L. O. Sullivan first employed the phrase manifest destiny, meaning that the U.S. had a divinely appointed mission to occupy all of North America. So it gave them Americans this idea that it was their right and their duty, not only their right, but their duty to kind of occupy all of what would become the U.S. and move westward. Although O'Sullivan did not write this until 1845, so it wasn't actually turned until 1845, this concept was familiar much earlier. And this painting is quite famous and really is a representation of the concept of manifest destiny, with this woman who, I believe she's carrying a Bible, so they're bringing Christianity across, and all these, we can see the pioneers moving across. We see railroads in the background, and they're bringing light, right? They're bringing across goodness and light and Christianity and goods and all these things, and they're chasing out the bad, the Indians, the buffalo, which they will use. So they're bringing light to the West and making it a better place. Okay. Another term that comes out of this, I want to say one more thing, that comes out of this is individualism. And it's a concept that people believed in self-improvement, and that they should, it was very much related to the market revolution, that you should be not only self-interested, but you should be working on yourself, but also you should make decisions that benefit you. So this individualism is a term that really enters the American kind of vernacular in the 1820s, and is promoted alongside of these ideas that are promoting the market revolution at this time. Okay, so now let's talk about